Today, forest management is extremely complex. We must balance demands for a variety of uses: fish, wildlife, recreation, and the need to maintain a healthy forest industry. All these things are considered in making decisions. Public input is crucial to determining how our forests will be managed, and that's why it's important for you to explore and understand all sides of an issue before forming an opinion. This program describes how the Ministry of Forest practices integrated forest resource management. Hopefully, it will encourage you to examine the other points of view as well, so together we can make informed decisions about forest management in British Columbia.
Hi, I'm Saffron. This is Rick.
And we're your hosts in this Ministry of Forest video titled All Things Consider.
If you're concerned about jobs, the environment, and how they're related to managing BC's forests, you'll find this program very interesting.
You probably already have an opinion on how BC's forests are being managed. Well, see how it checks out with All Things Considered.
British Columbia's forests. Your forests. Millions of hectares of some of the finest natural resources in the country. Trees, rangeland, water, fish, and wildlife.
Private owners control 5% of this forest land. The federal government regulates 1%, and the province owns the remaining 94%, called provincial crown land. The responsibility for managing most of BC's crown forests and rangeland rests with the Ministry of Forests. It's a government department of more than 3,400 employees in 6 forest regions and 43 districts throughout the province. Many other ministries, corporations, associations, and public groups also play active roles in managing the forests.
But the Ministry of Forests is a lead agency by law. 2 pieces of legislation, the Forest Act and the Ministry of Forests Act, largely determine who manages BC's forests and how. These acts set out conditions for forest management and enable the ministry to determine the volume of trees harvested each year, protect the forest from fire, insects, and diseases, and inspect forest industry activities.
The acts also make the Ministry of Forests responsible for other resources as well. The ministry must consider and integrate the management of timber with the management of water, fish, wildlife, domestic livestock, and other important forest land resources.
The ministry places great importance on integrated resource management. It coordinates the use of various forest resources in ways that benefit both the environment and the economy. Given the tremendous impact of forest use on the economy, the ministry must consider how changes may affect jobs, incomes, and social services, especially in resource-dependent communities. Just as important is the impact of forest use on the environment. The ministry must consider how any change in the use of one resource affects the well-being of the others, and how it affects the overall quality of life in BC. With all decisions related to forest land, the ministry must maintain a balanced position, a balanced point of view.
Just because the role of the Ministry of Forests is defined by law doesn't mean it never changes. Since forest legislation was first introduced in 1912, laws and the ministry's role have changed as society's values and needs have changed. Wilderness, for instance, was once seen as something to conquer and to subdue. Today it is valued as a resource in its own right. That value is reflected in the Forest Amendment Act of 1987. It makes sure the Ministry of Forests considers wilderness in its resource management plans. The Act also put most of the responsibility for reforesting harvested sites from the ministry to the forest industry. Society felt that companies who have the privilege of harvesting publicly owned lands should reforest sites at their own expense.
Changes to legislation and shifts in ministry roles are often related to shifts in society's needs and values. Change may be slower than the public and resource managers would like, but it does occur. Change in nature is very slow too, especially on forest land, where trees take 80 to 200 years or more to mature. That's why it's important not to judge actions taken several decades ago by the needs and values of today. With that in mind, let's look at some current Ministry of Forest views on 5 forest management issues: old growth, harvesting, reforestation, environmental concerns, and recreational values.
The Ministry realizes that there are different points of view on each of these issues, but when it comes to forest management, no one has all the answers.
Old growth. What does it mean? There's no commonly accepted definition.
Some people think of old growth as mature forests that have reached the peak of their growth, or forests that have passed it. Some think only of ancient forests that are hundreds of years old. Still others call any big tree old growth, when in fact it may be a young, fast-growing species. On the other hand, there are small trees, hundreds of years old, that are seldom recognized as old growth. Whatever old growth means, most people agree it has value, and many want to preserve much of it. Old forests are a part of BC's heritage, living links with history. They offer aesthetic and recreational enjoyment. They provide an important part of year-round or seasonal habitat for such wildlife as deer, caribou, bald eagles, and woodpeckers. Fallen logs in old stands can create quality habitat for fish. Old stands also help return nutrients to the soil and protect water quality. Scientists are learning a great deal from old forests, about the way that forests grow, about how each element in the forest ecosystem relates to all others, and about the structure and function of unique ecosystems. Knowledge of these ecosystems supports the conservation of a wide diversity of plants and animals. For all these reasons and more, many stands of old-growth trees of whatever age are preserved.
But BC can't preserve them all. Forest products are extremely important to the economy. They provide thousands of jobs in the forest industry and thousands more in the service industry. In some communities, forest-related jobs provide almost all the employment and support almost all the families. The money made from harvesting our forests helps pay for many of the social services that every British Columbian enjoys.
BC recognizes the value of old forests to both a healthy economy and a healthy environment.
And that's why forest managers preserve some stands and harvest others. In 1945, a public inquiry into forest policy changed the philosophy and the practice of managing timber in BC. Managers began to practice forestry that would ensure a continuous supply of wood for the future.
They limited yearly harvest to the amount of timber produced by the annual growth of forest stands, plus a portion of BC's older stands. Provincial Crown forest land is split up into management units called timber supply areas and tree farm licenses. The Ministry of Forests grants rights to individuals and companies, large and small, to harvest and manage stands of trees in these units, and keeps an eye on their activities. Forest managers estimate the growth of forest stands on the basis of age, species, height, diameter, density, and growing conditions of the trees. They use computer models to see how the timber supply might be affected by such things as pests and fire, different forest tending techniques, the needs of non-timber resources, and changing land use preferences of the public. From all this, the Chief Forester for the Ministry sets the allowable annual cut, which limits how much harvesting can be done each year in each management unit.
Harvesting is an important stage in forest management. It's a part of a system of removing and replacing stands.
In BC, we use clear cutting, selection, shelterwood, and seed tree systems. Clear cutting removes all the trees from a site in a single harvest. It is common where forest managers plan the regeneration of species that need full sunlight, or shallow-rooted species that blow over easily if mature stands are thinned. Clear cutting is also common on sites reforested with genetically improved seedlings and in stands attacked by pests. By clear cutting, forest managers can salvage wood from dead trees and control the spread of pests. Disadvantages of clear cutting include the risk of decreasing soil nutrients and increasing erosion and landslides. Clear cutting can also affect recreation, tourism, and some fish and wildlife habitat. The law, however, requires forest managers to take a look at these risks before harvesting.
Selection cutting only removes mature trees as scattered individuals or groups at regular intervals. It's common in the BC interior, in stands of mixed species where one species is removed before the other. Selection cutting is also used to remove pine in areas affected by mountain pine beetles, and to create winter range for black-tailed deer. It's the best way to harvest special products like pilings, poles, building logs, and fencing materials. Selection cutting is common on sites ecologically best suited to natural regeneration, not planting. It's also used for species that can grow in the shade and to create uneven aged stands. This system usually requires a lot of roads and trails, which increases site disturbance and soil compaction. On the other hand, these road networks increase access to sites for fire protection, stand tending, and recreation. Disadvantages of selection cutting include the risk of damage to those trees left standing, and soil damage from repeated use of machinery. As with clear cutting, the law requires forest managers to address these risks before harvesting.
Some of the characteristics of clear cutting and selection cutting are combined in shelter wood cutting. It involves the gradual removal of a stand through several cuttings. The first cutting opens a stand to encourage regeneration. Further cuttings remove more mature trees, increasing the space and light needed for new trees to grow. Shelter wood cutting is used for species that regenerate well in shade and for seedlings that need the protection of older trees. This system often requires an extensive network of roads and trails. Disadvantages are the same as those for selection cutting: risk of damage to trees left standing and soil damage from repeated use of machinery.
The seed tree system involves selecting superior, dominant trees and keeping them on the cut block as a seed source for the next forest crop. The trees are evenly distributed to help create a uniform layer of regeneration. The number of trees retained is determined by the site and species characteristics.
How do forest managers choose one of these systems? Well, for each forest site, they consider many things: the ecosystem, climate, terrain, soil stability, watercourses, and the needs of the new trees that will replace the harvested stand. They consider the age and condition of the trees to be harvested and the effects cutting may have on such resources as fish and wildlife. They consider how harvesting affects scenery and recreation. Forest managers also choose a system with regard to the safety of the loggers, the type of equipment needed, and the costs.
In BC, the rate and method of harvest are chosen after a lot of thought. Not that there haven't been mistakes.
But forest managers make every effort to make sound decisions based on the information they have.
And they recognize the importance harvesting has in setting the stage for future forests.
And in accommodating all important forest resources.
Because BC's forests are so important to both the economy and the environment, a strong reforestation program is critical.
Since 1987, all companies holding major cutting permits have been required to reforest all areas they harvest.
They must provide prompt reforestation through either replanting or natural regeneration. Public opinion has not always supported such long-term projects as creating new forests. Sufficient money and personnel haven't always been available.
Therefore, the number of seedlings planted in BC each year has varied.
The first forest plantations were established in 1930, Since then, the planting program has increased to the present level where more than 50% of the harvested areas are planted. Is that enough? Some people don't think so, but in just 50 years it's come a long way and it's still improving. And remember, not all sites need to be or should be planted. It is ecologically sound to allow natural regeneration on about half of the area harvested. Many hemlock and lodgepole pine sites, for example, regenerate well after the ground is prepared. Most harvested sites in BC are restocked or prepared for natural regeneration within 1 to 3 years. But there is a backlog of sites that haven't been reforested satisfactorily with commercial species. In the past, some plantations have died due to poor maintenance. Some areas were not planted because of shortages of seedlings or because of a lack of knowledge on how to reforest them properly. BC has been getting to these sites as fast as possible while keeping up with newly cleared sites, but it all takes time and money.
Deciding which type of tree to plant on which site is critical. The choice is made long before a site is harvested and depends on the ecosystem and the conditions of each site. Foresters have learned to read the clues nature gives them, the age, species, and growth of trees at the site, and the variety of plants, herbs, and mosses there. The vegetation indicates the levels of soil nutrients and moisture, and all this information helps foresters choose the best species of trees to plant. Forest managers haven't always known how to read these signs, so many plantations suffered low survival rates. But these rates have improved as the knowledge of forestry has grown.
Some people worry that reforestation is creating a monoculture, that it ignores the value of diversity by planting a single species on a forest site. Today, foresters plant a mixture of species on many sites, but even if only one type of tree is planted on a site, other species fill in naturally. After 10 to 15 years, sites planted with spruce also grow pine, balsam, aspen, and birch, for instance. If companies are planting the right seedlings, can we expect enough to survive and to mature? Of course, as a stand grows, stronger trees crowd out weaker ones. At maturity, there is only room for about 1/3 of the original number planted.
To make sure there will be enough mature trees, companies plant healthy seedlings grown from the best seed collected in the forest or from genetically improved seed from orchards. Nurseries try to produce seedlings to survive in the soil and temperatures of their future growing sites. Before companies plant, they prepare the site so seedlings can root easily and get the water and nutrients they need. Preparing the site dramatically reduces the time seedlings take to get established. The Ministry of Forests requires companies to tend the young trees according to ministry standards until a forest stand has reached the point where its growth is no longer threatened by competing vegetation. If a company doesn't establish a healthy new stand, the ministry may fine them and have the job done at the company's expense. The ministry may also reduce the company's future harvesting privileges. Together, the ministry and the forest industry are ensuring the reforestation of all harvested sites in ways that are economically and environmentally sound.
This plantation is just one example of what can be achieved.
Forest management practices can affect a lot more than trees. It can affect the whole forest environment, both positively and negatively.
The Ministry of Forests is responsible for seeing that forest land is managed in environmentally acceptable ways.
They work with many other agencies and forest companies to protect our environment. Soil, for example, is a prime forest resource and must be protected to ensure the success of future forests. Erosion is one problem that forest practices, mainly harvesting and road building, can cause. In turn, that erosion can increase sediment in rivers, decreasing the quality of a community's water supply and endangering fish habitat. To reduce soil erosion and protect bodies of water, forest road engineers can build roads away from slide areas, stabilize slopes, and do regular road maintenance. Timber harvesters can leave selected stands of trees to reduce landslide hazards, use overhead methods of moving logs to reduce ground disturbance, or skid the logs when the ground is covered with snow.
More than any other forest management practice, harvesting can affect wildlife habitat. Forest managers must work with wildlife managers to protect BC wildlife. They save strategically located clumps of trees as protective cover, and mature trees or snags for birds to nest in. Forest management also affects domestic livestock that, like wildlife, uses forested rangeland. By clearing forest stands, harvesters create lush forage for both wild and domestic animals. In some areas, forest managers seed clear cuts with grass to increase forage as well as decrease soil erosion. Because timber traffic disturbs some domestic livestock and wildlife, managers try to locate roads away from important grazing areas.
Forest managers are also concerned about the impact of their practices on air quality. Prescribed burning, used to prepare planting sites, creates smoke. Managers assess forest conditions and time their burns to reduce the amount of smoke, especially close to communities. Researchers in the Ministry of Forests have been studying effects of harvesting on the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. So far, they have focused their research on harvests of lodgepole pine. They found that after 80 years, a stand recovers about 95% of the carbon it contained before the harvest. Because large amounts of carbon dioxide are harmful to the Earth's atmosphere, researchers were pleased to find that lodgepole pine harvests make no net contribution to the carbon dioxide in the air. Furthermore, they found that prescribed burning of harvest debris makes very little difference to the carbon dioxide released over a number of years. Research is increasing the understanding of how forest management practices affect the environment and is helping find new ways to protect it. Forest managers understand more today than they did even 5 years ago, but there's more to learn.
Still, the economy can't be put on hold until all the answers are in. Managers have to keep doing the best they can with the knowledge they have.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of British Columbians use forest land for recreation.
And it's a major tourist attraction, a big part of the province's second largest industry.
The greatest detraction to recreational enjoyment of forest land comes from harvesting, particularly clear-cutting. Many forest managers agree that a clear-cut is an ugly sight that may last several years before reforestation turns it green again. More and more, they are using a variety of landscape management techniques to reduce the visual impact of clear cuts. For instance, in some areas they plant small cut blocks and design irregular shapes that blend with the natural environment. They create reserves between cut blocks and harvest the blocks very gradually. Sometimes, they even use trees to screen clear cuts from view. Forest managers know where the recreational resources are and keep track of the demand for them. This information helps set objectives for recreation within the overall resource planning process.
Forest managers also set up demonstration forests and work to improve recreation opportunities on forest land. With user groups, they build and manage extensive networks of roads and trails, and hundreds of rustic camping and picnic sites for free public use. Forest managers respond to such recreation trends as canoeing and cross-country skiing by developing networks of lakes and trails. They manage heritage trails in cooperation with the BC Ministry of Municipal Affairs, Recreation and Culture. If a forest practice threatens recreation, managers may devote certain areas completely to recreational use.
The Ministry of Forests also manages areas of wilderness that are exempt from commercial harvesting. This wilderness attracts recreationists and tourists. It is valued for its natural ecosystems, its fish and wildlife, and its wild beauty. By managing large tracts of wilderness, BC is preserving an important part of its natural heritage. As forest managers work to protect and improve forest recreational opportunities of all kinds, they are creating a healthy forest environment for many other forest uses too.
What lies ahead for forest management in BC? Research, change, improvements, gathering public input, planning and replanning, maintaining a high priority on integrated resource management, and renewing efforts to benefit both the environment and the economy.
Still, questions about our forest resources will continue, as will conflicts over their management and use.
The Ministry of Forests won't ever have all the answers. No one will.
But as the agency legally responsible for most of BC's crown forests, the ministry will continue to maintain a balanced point of view.
By considering all the important values in our forests.
For more detailed information, please refer to our booklet, All Things Considered, or contact any Ministry of Forests office. To obtain other points of view, please refer to the list on page 83 of organizations who also have information about forest management in British Columbia.